que engloba toda la oferta de la obra social de la Caixa para promover el desarrollo competencial del alumno a través de distintos recursos y actividades, les presentamos a David Johnson. Johnson es profesor de la Universidad de Minnesota. Se doctoró en Psicología Social por la Teachers College de la Universidad de Columbia y es cofundador, junto a su hermano Roger, del Instituto de Aprendizaje Cooperativo. Comparte con nosotros la ponencia titulada Cooperar, la fuerza de la diferencia.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me? All right. Yes, it's better with the lights on. Woody Allen once said, showing up is 80% of life. You should turn to the person next to you and say, hey, congratulations, you showed up. Go ahead and do that. Turn to the person next to you and say, congratulations. All right. The good news is you're here. You showed up. The bad news is you're going to have a few more responsibilities than just being here. Mainly in the next hour, you're going to have two responsibilities. One is to make sure you get something worthwhile of value to you out of what takes place. The second responsibility is to make sure everybody else in this room gets something valuable, worthwhile, interesting to them out of what takes place. And this means that how cooperative and how awake and how alert the people next to you are will determine whether you have a hard or an easy hour. So turn and take a careful look at the person on your left. Now turn and take a careful look at the person on your right. And think to yourself, how cooperative do these people appear to be? Now, to help you decide, I have a little test for you to give them. And that is another American comedian back in the 1930s, Will Rogers, once said, life is give and take. And a very famous American educator named Roger Johnson said that's a good definition for cooperation. Cooperation is give and take. And so your next task is turn to the person next to you, give them something, take something from them. Now, think about this for a minute. Do not give them anything that you really will miss. Don't give them your favorite pen or your last piece of paper. But find something, like a breath mint is always good. Find something, give it to them, and take something from them. All right, do that. Do that. You have to give them something. All right. That helps. Thank you. All right. Now, what we're going to go over in the next few minutes is a definition of what is cooperative learning. Second, what are the 5 basic elements that make it work? And thirdly is what is some of the research supporting the use of cooperative learning? And that will probably take us more than the hour, so we may have to cut some of it fairly short. But to begin with, let me say, at any teacher, any age student, any subject area, any curriculum, the teacher always has 3 choices about how to structure the lesson. One is the teacher can tell students, let's compete to see who's best. Secondly, they can say, do this individually on your own without talking to the other members of the class. Or third, the teacher can put them in small groups, pairs, 3s, or 4s, and say, do this cooperatively. The teacher always has the choice, on how to structure the lesson. And probably the most powerful, the most effective, but maybe the least used in many schools is cooperation, cooperative learning. And what cooperative learning does is, one, it makes students active, not passive. You want students engaged in the learning experience, not listening silently, taking notes. Second, it makes the students should be talking and exchanging ideas and explaining things to each other, not silent. And thirdly, students should be connected to each other, interacting with each other, not isolated and or alone. Now, if a teacher structures cooperative learning effectively in the classroom, there's a great deal of research that says that many good things will happen. And when I say a great deal of research, I mean at least 2,000 studies. And the first study in the United States on this was published back in 1898. There were studies in Germany, France, and England before that. So we've had at least 130 years of research on cooperation, competition, individualistic work. And what this research tends to say, and I'll come back to this in more detail later if there's time, is that one, more students will work harder to achieve more of the time when they're in cooperative learning groups than when they're in competitive or individualistic situations. And that effort to achieve includes things: actual achievement, retention, higher level reasoning, use of higher level strategies in solving problems, achievement motivation, motivation to learn more about the subject after the class has ended. It's a whole cluster of things around achievement. But secondly, every time students work together, the relationship changes. And usually it changes for the better. So in cooperative learning groups, students know each other better. They like each other better. They have more friends, and they're more supportive of each other, both supportive academically and helping each other learn, but also supportive personally, helping them with any of the issues in their lives. And then the third category of outcomes is psychological health. And that is, as students work together in cooperative learning groups, their social competencies increase. They become more skilled about how to work with each other and how to work as part of a team. Their overall psychological adjustment and psychological health improves. Their self-esteem tends to go up, and their ability to deal with stress and adversity tends to increase. Now, with cooperative learning, This means it's a very cost-effective procedure. With cooperative learning, you get all three of these things. You got increases in achievement while students' relationships improve and students' psychological health tends to improve. And then the next point I want to make in the introduction is that the role of the teacher has been changing for the past 3 decades or so. And essentially, instead of being a presenter of information, the teacher has become a designer of learning experiences. And so as a teacher, you design the best learning experience you possibly can for students in the classroom, which goes way beyond presenting information to them. And to sort of give you a flavor of this, this is a joke that appeared in an American newspaper several years ago. But in America, there's a standard question that all parents ask their children as they come home from school. And that is, the parent says, what did you learn in school today? And usually the student says, nothing. Nothing. But in this case, the student is saying, the teacher didn't give us a chance to learn anything. The teacher talked the whole day long. And it's an important point that in designing learning experiences, it isn't listening. You know, it isn't just listening to the teacher. Learning should be far more engaging than that. Okay. Now, also at the beginning, I should say, everything you're going to hear today was developed jointly with my brother Roger and myself. And this is a picture of Roger and I, just in case you ever see us walking down the street, so that you can tell the difference. And we are brothers. We're 1.5 years apart in age, and we grew up mainly on a farm in Indiana, the middle part of the United States. And we had a very intense sibling rivalry, so we fought all the time. I hate to admit this because when we were children, fighting meant something different than it does today. But we would have several fist fights a day. But also, we were best friends. And we're now both at the University of Minnesota. We still fight every day, but only with words. We've given up fist fighting a long time ago. And we're still best friends. You know, it goes together. Well, the basic sibling rivalry we had was over one basic issue, and that is Roger, as a science educator and as the older brother, believes in his heart that the future of humankind, the survival of our species, depends upon one basic principle, and that is respect for your elders. And he's elder. He's elder. And I, of course, as the younger brother, believe strongly everyone is equal. Everyone is equal. And that's what we fought about for years and years and years. And just out of curiosity, turn to the person next to you and say, well, what do you believe? Does older mean superior, or is everyone equal? Ask the person next to you, see what they say. Okay. Now, I want to add, this is still a serious issue with Roger. And so, for example, a few weeks ago, we're walking along a beach planning a workshop, and Roger tripped over something in the sand. And he reaches down the sand, and he pulls out this object he tripped on, and lo and behold, it was an oil lamp from the Middle East. He starts wiping the sand off this oil lamp so he can get a better look at it. And suddenly, poof, a genie appeared. And the genie says to Roger, he says, "You have liberated me from the lamp." Said, "Therefore, I will give you 3 wishes. Anything your heart desires. But there is one catch. Anything you wish for, your brother David gets double." And Roger thought, this does not sound good. But he said to the genie, he said, "Well," he said, "I've always wanted a red Ferrari." And the genie says, "Done." And poof, a red Ferrari for Roger. Poof, poof, 2 red Ferraris for me. Roger looks at it and thinks, he says, "Well," he says, "I've always wanted $1 million. And the genie says, "Done." And poof, $1 million for Roger. Poof, poof, $2 million for me. And Roger looks at that and thinks, he says, "You know," he says, "I've always wanted to donate a kidney to science." It's tough having an older brother. But here's a more recent picture of Roger and I. And just for no reason at all, my wife Linda does a lot of work for us. She runs a book company that publishes our books. And so I brought a picture of her along also. Now, your next step, if we're going to talk about cooperative learning, you need a cooperative group. And this transition has to be very quick in a group this size and in an auditorium seating arrangement. But I want everyone to form a group of 3. I want everyone to change chairs. I want you to find 2 people you do not know who look different from you. So if you're tall, find short people. If you're brunette, find blondes. If you're male, pair up with a female. If you're from this city, find people from other cities. If you teach high school, find an elementary school teacher. But everybody stand up, find 2 people who are different from you, who you don't know, and then sit down again in a group of 3. And I will tell you what's next. Okay, sit down. Find 3 chairs and sit down. Find 3 chairs and sit down. If you can hear me, raise your hand. If you can hear me, raise your hand. And everybody should be sitting down. You should be in a group of 3 with 2 strangers, and you should have 3 chairs, and you should sit down. Now, the next step is I want you to find out 3 things about the people you're with. And that is, I want you to know their names so that if you saw them on the street 2 weeks from now, you would immediately say their name, their dog. So you need to know who they are, their name. Secondly, find out what they do where. That is, where do they teach? What do they teach? What grade level? What's their role in the school or the district, and so forth. And thirdly, say, well, what's one of your favorite places in the whole world? And so, of course, my name is David. I'm a professor of social psychology at the University of Minnesota. That's what I do. And there's a little lake called Lake Berg up in the Canadian Rockies below Mount Robson. And it has a glacier coming down into the lake. And at night, as you camp there, chunks of ice will break off and float around in the lake in the moonlight. It is wonderful. It's one of my very favorite places. So turn to your group and say, well, who are you? What do you do? Where's one of your favorite places? And get an answer. Okay, if you can hear me, raise your hand. If you can hear me, raise your hand. And sorry about this, I hate to interrupt, but time is very short, so I'm going to interrupt you a lot as we go along. Now, the next issue is to say, what is cooperative learning? And I assume many of you use cooperative learning. You've read the materials on it. You probably have some expertise on it. But I want to make sure that everybody in the room has the same definition. In order to get the same definition for across all of us, there are 2 things I'm going to do. One is I'm going to conduct a micro lesson. And it will be frustrating because I'll go very fast. I just want you to see the structure of the lesson. Then I will come back and give you the official definitions, the conceptual definitions. And then we'll move on to what makes cooperation work and why is it so powerful. But in your group of 3, I'm going to give you a task, which is, I'll come back to this, but say how many rectangles are in this figure. And you'll need to count them. Now, your task is How many rectangles in that figure? And this is a critical point in a lesson. It's what Roger calls the moment, because I can keep you in suspense. Will I say compete to see who's best at spatial reasoning? Will I say do this individualistically on your own? Or will I say do this cooperative in your group of three? And of course, you know I'm going to say do it cooperatively. That is, I want one answer from the three of you. All three of you have to agree. All three of you need to be able to show where each one of these rectangles is. I will come around and randomly pick one member of your group to explain the rectangles. So you have to make sure everybody is ready. And I expect to see everybody participate and contribute. And this is intergroup cooperation, not intergroup competition. So if your group has a question, or you want to check your answers with somebody else, just ask the group next to you. They'll be glad to help. Okay, it might help if somebody has a pen and paper and copy this down, but here's the figure. How many rectangles are in this figure? Turn into your group and get an answer. Do you have an answer? 30? How many have you found so far? 30, 26 or 36? 26. So how many have you found so far? 14. Okay, keep going. How many have you found so far? 32. Okay. How many have you found so far? 32. All right. Okay. If you hear me, raise your hand. If you hear me, raise your hand. And again, I apologize for interrupting, but this is a micro lesson, not a real lesson. So I just given you a little bit of time for each stage. Now, in walking around the groups, I've heard answers of 26, 32, 14, 36. Is there any other answers that somebody wants to volunteer? Yes. 47. That's good. 40. Okay. Well, if anybody cares, the official book answer is 36. Now, but now, turn back this way. But now, if my brother Roger were here, as a science educator, he would say, as a teacher, you never worry too much about whether students have the, quote, right answer or not. Because he said, often groups will give you an answer that's more interesting than the right answer. So many years ago, actually, a group of 7th graders came up and they said 72 rectangles. And we said, how did you get 72? They said, well, 36 on this side, 36 on this side, 72. Now, Roger likes that answer much better than 36. And we once had a group of teachers saying 41, 42, 43, and we said, what are you doing? And they said, well, whoops. All right, my pointer isn't working, so I have to use this. But he said, every time 2 lines intersect in here, there's an itty-bitty little rectangle, and we're counting all of those, too. And Roger likes that better than the answer. And then if there's an English teacher here, they would say, obviously 37, because the word rectangle is on the page. And so you have to count the word also. Now, the next step is you have to write something down. So everybody needs a piece of paper and a pen, or at least one person in the group needs a piece of paper and a pen. And there's a statement you need to write down. Or you can write it down on your iPad. That would work. And the statement is this. Starts out, the purpose of a cooperative learning group. Say, the purpose of a cooperative learning group is to make each member a stronger individual. To say that again, the purpose of a cooperative learning group is to make each member a stronger individual. Now, as an educator, you know that if you're in a group of 3 and one person says, I just can't do spatial reasoning, and you say to them, write down 36. Don't worry about it. Just write down 36 and turn it in. That does not make them a stronger individual. Because what's supposed to happen is you do rectangles in a group today. Tomorrow, I'm going to bring you all back and hand you triangles and say, do it alone by yourself. That is, there's a pattern and flow to classroom learning. You learn it in a group, you perform it alone. You learn it in a group, you perform it alone. And learning it in a group today should make you better able to perform it alone tomorrow than if you learned it alone today and then had to perform it alone tomorrow. Technically, group to individual transfer is greater than individual to individual transfer. Now, if that means that, well, instead of knowing 36 is the answer, members of your group have to have a strategy for solving this type of problem. So when I give an individual test tomorrow, they'll do well. They'll have the strategy and they'll do well. So your next task is I want you to stand up and just turn around, find somebody very near you from another group. And I want you to come up with 3 strategies on how to solve this problem. And if you're lucky, your group will have used one strategy. They will have used a different strategy. And then all you have to do is think of one more, to get 3. And I'm only going to give you a minute or two to do this. Don't sit down. Just turn up and face it. Standing up, face them. But come up with 3 strategies to solve this problem. All right, let's do that. Just grab him. Yes.
Gracias, thank you.
Okay, if you can hear me, raise your hand. If you can hear me, raise your hand. And thank this person, go back to your triad. Thank this person, go back to your triad. Now, what I should explain next is there are many different strategies for finding this answer. One strategy is random, just count rectangles wherever you see them. Another strategy is color coding. Take colored pencils and draw out each figure separately, or you can draw them out separately on another piece of paper till you get 36 different figures. Another strategy is smallest to largest. How many singles, how many doubles, how many triples, and so forth. Another strategy is to number each rectangle. So you say 1 is 1, 1, 2 is 1, 1, 2, 3 is 1. Another strategy is to letter each point. So you say, well, A, B, F, E is 1, A, B, C, G, F, E is another, and so forth. There are many different strategies. For this figure, there's even a mathematical formula that tells you the answer, which won't work with triangles, by the way. So that's why it's not on the PowerPoint slide. Now, if you had enough time to work, And if I taught this lesson as well as Roger could teach it, each of you would have learned a strategy in your group that you may not have thought of working alone. And just out of curiosity, how many people did learn a strategy from their group that they may not have thought of if you were doing this by yourself? Raise your hand if you. That's good. That's good. Now, to carry this a step further, there's a professor of mathematics at the University of California at Berkeley, Alan Schoenfeld, that during the 1980s spoke at every math conference in North America at least once. You know, he was a very popular, entertaining speaker. But if he were here today, what he would say is, at the University of California, Berkeley, I get some of the smartest math students in the world. They have a perfect score on the math part of the SATs, which is our entrance, you know, a standardized test for entering the universities. He said, they always give you the right answer. They never miss. They always give you the right answer. But as I teach them, I find out many of them misunderstand the math, or most of them don't understand the math, and many of them misunderstand the math. But they memorize formulas, they memorize procedures, they give you the right answer, they never miss. And then he'd say the only way you can find out what a student truly understands is listen to them explain it to someone else. So he said in math class, what you should do, put students in cooperative groups, give them a set of problems, and the teacher goes around and listens in. And what you get is a window into students' minds. They make covert cognitive processing overt, so you can examine it and see it. And he said, a homework assignment handed in that's perfect. A perfect answer on a test really is not a good sample of what a student understands. Said you have to hear them explain it to someone else to know if they understand the math or not. Now, if he were here, he would also say that, that students get fixated. It's a big problem in math. Students get fixated. So you ask the student, how many rectangles in this figure? And one of your smartest students can say 9. 9 rectangles, so easy. And you say, there's more. Say, no, there isn't. There's 9. Are you crazy? There's 9. And they get fixated. They can't see it any other way. And there's been a lot of research on how do you break fixation. And the teacher can say, there's more. Look for more. That doesn't help much at all. The teacher can solve a problem at the board and say, you do exactly what I'm doing. They can model how to solve it. That helps, but not a whole lot. And what Alan Schoenfeld would say is the best way we know to break fixation is to give students a learning partner who have a different answer and have them argue it out. So you put a student, you give the student the answer, and the student says 9. Obviously, 9 rectangles. And the other student says, well, I see 12. He says, well, how on earth do you see 12? Say, well, each column is a rectangle. And the first student looks at that and says, well, if you're going to do that, I say 15, because each row is a rectangle. And pretty soon they're at 36. Now, groups get fixated too. You can say to groups, come up with 3 strategies to solve this answer. And the groups say 3, there's just one, smallest to largest. How many singles, how many doubles? That's the way you do it. And guess what is the best way to make your group's fixation? Pair them up with another group who has a different strategy. And once they see 2 strategies, then they can see 3 or 4 or 5. And then finally, what Alan Schoenfeld would say is whenever possible, use heterogeneous groups. Said what you want is a group of three in which one person says color code the figures. No one says smallest to largest. No one says number each rectangle. And in a heterogeneous group with different strategies, it's a much greater learning environment than it is if everybody says smallest to largest, you know, if they only have one strategy. So he said, go heterogeneous whenever you can. Now, the next next thing is turn into your group, and I want you to say, what's our final answer? What's our favorite strategy? And then everybody at least pretend to sign the paper. And then you hand it in, although I'm not going to have you hand it in. But Roger would say you always have students hand group products in because they need to take groups very seriously. And so in this case, just say, what's our final answer? What's our favorite strategy? And everybody sign. Now, the signature means three things. One is the signature means I agree with this answer. Signature means second, I can find each one of these rectangles. Call on me up to the front. I will show you where each one of these rectangles is. And three, the signature means you have my word of honor. Everyone in my group can find these rectangles. And so call on any of us. Now, what this means is if you have someone in your group who can only find 28 rectangles, you sign for 28, even though you might be able to find for 36. But you're giving your word of honor on the other members of your group and what they can find. So you sign off on what you know is safe for all three of you. And this sets up a situation in the classroom that is half humorous, half serious. And that is, you have them working triads today on rectangles. Tomorrow you come in, give a test on triangles. And you go to a group of three, and well, maybe I'll pick on this group. You go to this group of three, and you say to the first student, perfect score, A+, way to go. Go to the second student, say you missed 2, A, but good. Go to the third student, says you only got 2 right, F. And then he said to the student who got an F, say, well, you're okay. You just have to work harder. But the other 2 students, you're in a little bit of trouble because I have your signature from yesterday saying everyone in your group was ready, and she was not ready. Say, you 2 stay after school. We have to talk. And now this is half humorous, but it's a very important point. You don't sign till everyone has learned, until you know that everyone is stronger from being in the group. You don't sign off on them. And all right, now let's do this. Turn in your group, say what's our final answer, what's our favorite strategy, and at least imaginary, everybody sign. And I'll give you 30 seconds for this. Okay, turn back this way. Turn back this way. And there are 2 more short steps to complete the micro lesson. And the first one is group processing. So turn back to your group and say, what are 3 things we did well in working on these rectangles? And make sure each member of your group gets some specific, honest, positive feedback about the way they contributed to the group. So 3 things, 1 for each person in your group. And if you have time, then you add, what is 1 thing we could add to be even better tomorrow than we were today? But I probably won't give you enough time to get there. But at least turn in your group and say, what's something each person did well that contributed to the group? Make sure they get some positive feedback. All right, you have 90 seconds. Begin. Okay, I'm going to have to interrupt again. And there's another basic point that I need to make around this, and that is Roger and I would say only positive feedback. You only have students give each other positive feedback. And I'm sure this is not true of Spain, but in North America, United States and Canada, many students get negative comments all day long. Teacher says, why are you out of your seat? Where's your book? How come you didn't do your homework? Where's your pencil? Say, why are you on page 47 when everyone else is on page 65? You know, it's negative, 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 negative all day long for many students. And you, of course, because you're here listening to cooperative learning, want to reverse that. Want to make every day a joyful day, you know, in the classroom. Now, obviously, as a teacher, it can't be you giving positive comments to every student. I once was a high school English teacher, 30 students, 50 minutes. If I went around to each student and gave them a positive comment, I would have less than 90 seconds per student with no teaching whatsoever. So obviously it can't be the teacher who gives this positive feedback, but the teacher can design it in. The teacher can engineer it in. And the way you do that is very simple. You give them a learning partner. They work together during the class session. And at the end of the class session, you say, turn to your partner, tell them 1 thing they did to help you learn today. And everyone goes out on a positive note. And hopefully, when you see them come through the door tomorrow, you'll see a smile on their face because they know something good is going to happen to me here today. You know, now I'm going to have to go through these definitions very quickly. But the difference between a cooperative, competitive, individualistic learning experience is in competition, there's a negative correlation between goal attainments. So if, I don't know anybody's names, if the man in the yellow jacket and I are competing, anything that helps him find 36 rectangles hurts me. That lowers my chances of getting an A. Anything that causes me to do my homework, to come to class prepared, that hurts him. That lowers his chances of getting an A. So it becomes in my best interest that he not study and learn. It's in his best interest that I not study and learn. Now, the second alternative for a teacher is individualistic. And individualistic, there's no correlation among goal attainments. Everybody works by themselves independently. And the woman in the red sweater, if I pick on her, whether she finds 36 rectangles or not in an individualistic lesson makes no difference to me whatsoever. I could care less. Whether she did her homework, I could care less, because we're independent, separate learners. Now, with cooperation, there's a positive correlation between goal attainments. So if the woman in the pink sweater and I were cooperating, anything that helps her find 36 rectangles helps me. Anything that causes me to do my homework, come to class prepared, that helps her. It's in her best interest that I study and learn. And it's in my best interest that she study and learn. Now, I'm down to my last 3 minutes. I'm going to run at least 2 or 3 minutes over, so sorry. But I just want to make a basic point to this chart. I wish I had time to explain it. But what this chart says, reminds us of, is not all groups are cooperative groups. You can have what's called a pseudo group, which is competition at close quarters. So students are working in a group, but they make fun of each other, they sabotage each other's work, they pick and bully on each other, and every student would be better off working by themselves than in that pseudo group. As you move up this chart, you see traditional classroom group, and that's more like individualistic with talking. Students really work independently, but they can talk, but they're seated together and they can talk and share if they want to. And while most students are better off in that group than working alone, some of your brightest and students would do better by themselves than being a member of that group. Now, as you move up the chart, you then see a cooperative group. And in a cooperative group, all members are better off in the group than they are working alone. And we have a number of research studies that shows that gifted students in a well-run cooperative group do better in the group than they would by themselves, working on their own, do much better when working together. Now, what makes the group cooperative, the difference between the pseudo group, the traditional group, cooperative learning, are 5 basic elements. And you'll have to come back to another presentation to hear much about them. But they're positive interdependence. That is, there's a group goal, which is to learn the material, make sure everybody in your group has learned the material. And students have to believe in that and accept it in their heart, that they really have to be concerned about each other's learning as well as their own. Second, there has to be individual accountability. If one student thinks they can sleep through the class, the other group members have to make them do their fair share of the work. You know, that no one gets a free ride. Third is they have to help, share, assist, encourage each other. It's called promotive interaction. And fourth is social skills. Cooperative learning groups require leadership. They require group decision-making, conflict resolution, trust building. They have to become socially competent, you know, in order to work effectively in the group. And the fifth one is group processing, which we did. And all right, and then I want to come back to what I said at the beginning, and I'm sorry I can't go into more depth, but it's that there's a ton of research, more research on cooperative learning than there is probably for any other aspect of educational practice that supports the use of cooperative learning. If the groups are truly cooperative, that is, if those 5 basic elements are established in the group. And besides higher achievement, take a quick look at the 2 people you're working with. You know, just glance at them. Well, you have worked with these people. You worked with these people on rectangles for about 5 minutes, and then a few other tasks along the way. But the odds are the relationship will never be the same. That is, if you see this person on the street 2 weeks from now, you will react differently than you would have if you'd sat in a row and listened to a lecture for the past hour. You know, even 5 minutes of interaction can change the relationship between two students. And usually it makes it more positive. You know, this isn't perfect, so not always, but 95% of the time the relationships become more positive. Now, now I have to conclude and let you go. And this is one of my favorite quotes at the moment. It's an Italian author who said, "We're all angels with one wing. We can only fly while embracing each other." And I think it's a good metaphor for cooperative learning. So turn to your two other members of your group and say, "Hey, together we flew." Say, "Together we flew."